Moving home. When I was a kid we called it flitting. Of course people had no money in those days and usually only moved to another street nearby, so we'd probably use a handcart, or if not much furniture, the family's much loved washhouse pram. My parents decided we needed to move before, as Mum would say, the house collapses around our ears, so applied to the local council and were awarded a relatively new council flat with all modern conveniences in nearby West Gorton, a couple of miles up the road as Dad would say. At last we were to leave our late Victorian 2-up 2-down terraced house, primarily built for the local mill workers and their families. Mum had given birth to 7 children in a relatively short time of 73 months in that property, which was a miracle considering it only had one gas light, cold running water, no lighting upstairs, and an outside toilet which regularly froze in winter. And so, in mid-November we were to flit. A gloomy, slate grey overcast day as I remember, when my 13-year-old brother and I set off to walk to school as usual, him promising Mother to bring me safely with him to our new abode that evening. I also remember the day dragged terribly for me. I couldn't concentrate in the classroom, couldn't finish my dinner, and even shunned my favourite chocolate wagon wheel at playtime. At last the 4 o'clock bell rang and I dashed round to meet my brother in the senior's yard, before we made our way there with alacrity. Although I had played football and cricket in Gorton for school, and been to Bellevue's famous fairground and circus, I didn't have a clue how to get there. When we reached Ashton Road we turned and waved goodbye to Ardwick and the friends we had accumulated over the years, but this was just a rehearsal really, as I had 7 months and Robert another couple of years before we could leave Burley Street. After lighting a bus at some crossroads in Openshaw, we made our way along Pottery Lane to where Robert assured me we would eventually arrive at Gorton Flats. I recognised Ashbury Station from visiting Dad at his Ardwick East depot, and as we passed from under the railway bridge, Gorton Flats hove into view. Its checkerboard effect lighting as people arrived home from work and switched their lights on, reminiscent of a ghost ship in the night. In no time we were strolling along the road which took us through the epicentre of this huge domicile of humanity. Children played happily in the traffic-free spaces, girls skipping, boys playing football, and them only glancing now and then at the 2 strangers in their midst. As any young child on a journey of discovery would do, I asked Robert are we there yet, but he just smiled and explained this was Brook House, and we now lived in a smaller block next to somewhere called the Monastery. Just then 2 men in strange garb, somewhat resembling Robin Hood's befrocked henchman Friar Tuck, passed us by and Robert added, where they come from. My senses were at their zenith now, and I needed to know when we would be home, but he just laughed and guided me to this passageway which led through another block, and as we reached the end he stopped at the bottom of a staircase and pointed upwards. Our flat is at the top of these stairs, he said, but before we go up look across there, which I did. Lo and behold, striking out from the November gloom was the Leviathan that is St. Francis Monastery, a gigantic Gothic monument to God with its gigantic verdigris steeple piercing the clouds above and pointing towards heaven. And we were about to reside within its shadow, and of course now I realise why it was people's preferred point of reference. We scaled the stairs 2 at a time and soon we were within the confines of number 32. Every light bulb was burning bright, but all I could think of was how the illumination made our goods and chattels look even shabbier. And for the first time in my young life, aged 10, I had electricity. And this was home. It wasn't too long before I had my first bath in our very own bathroom, at Mum's insistence of course. And when I got out she said the water looked like ink, which upset me really, because I thought it just looked like gravy. I strolled onto our first ever veranda from where we could stare at the people below, or listen to the congregation singing, and all those who attended the school really only swore in Latin. I was exhausted, and after Dad went out to check the local pubs, I decided, much to Mother's surprise, on an early night. I tried flicking off the lights and getting in under the covers before it went dark, but failed, so I just lay there staring at the single light bulb with its daisy-shaped plastic shade, until the vision became permanent on the backs of my eyelids, and in the morning enjoyed the sheer luxury of reading my comic whilst sat on the toilet. The one and only hiccup throughout these events was the fact that our parents had somehow forgotten to inform our older brother James, who had recently joined the Royal Navy, that we had flitted. Imagine his surprise when on his very first leave, and on arriving at 5 Broome Street he found the house completely bricked up and condemned. Boy was he not happy. Luckily our Auntie Ethel lived nearby, and she happily furnished him with the requisite details. After she stopped laughing, mind. Many years later he asked my brother Robert how he knew where the flat was, seeing as he'd never visited it. He told me he had lied. The previous day he took Mama a mop and bucket up on his bike. The floors needed mopping.